It had been a long, grueling journey filled with countless job applications and endless interviews. My name is Jake, and after months of searching, I finally landed a job at a marketing firm. Thrilled but nervous, I stepped into the office, my heart pounding with anticipation and hope. From the moment I walked in, I could sense an uneasy atmosphere. The employees moved with a certain trepidation, glancing at the door as if waiting for a storm to break. I noticed the stark white walls, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the anxiety in the air. And then I met him, my boss, Mr. Carter, the embodiment of a corporate nightmare. Mr. Carter was a tall man with slicked back hair and a sharp suit that screamed authority. His piercing blue eyes felt like they could see right through you, and his demeanor was intimidating. I quickly learned that he was known as a Karen in the office, someone who could not stand to be challenged and had a penchant for belittling anyone who dared to voice an opinion. His office was a fortress, adorned with accolades and certificates that proclaimed his superiority. I'd heard whispers of how he treated employees, tales of late-night tirades and public humiliations. My heart sank when I witnessed it firsthand. During my first week, I made a small error in a report. A typo, really. The moment he saw it, he exploded. "How can you be so incompetent, Jake? You're wasting my time." His words echoed in my mind, leaving me shaken. The eyes of my colleagues were on me, filled with pity and fear. I felt like a child being scolded by a parent, and I could feel my cheeks flush with embarrassment. As the days turned into weeks, the office transformed into a pressure cooker. Overtime became the norm, and personal lives were virtually non-existent. I watched as my colleagues, once vibrant and full of life, became shadows of their former selves, working late into the night, haunted by Mr. Carter's relentless demands. He would not grant leave for emergencies, and the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. I often saw tears welling in the eyes of my co-workers, their spirits crushed under the weight of his expectations. Yet, despite the toxicity, I clung to my job tightly. My grandfather had fallen ill, and the family was relying on me to support them through this tough time. I did not want to lose this opportunity, especially after so much struggle. Then came the day when I received the call that would change everything. My mother's voice trembled as she told me that my grandfather had passed away. My heart sank. He had been my rock, my guiding light, the one who had taught me the value of hard work and integrity. I felt a wave of grief wash over me, but alongside it came the fear of Mr. Carter's reaction. I knew I had to attend the funeral, so I approached HR, quietly requesting 2 days off. Thankfully, Miss Thompson, the HR manager, approved it without question. She offered her condolences, her eyes filled with empathy. But the thought of telling Mr. Carter made me uneasy. I decided to keep it under wraps, fearing his wrath, knowing he'd see my absence as a personal affront. The day of the funeral arrived, and I stood there surrounded by family and friends, my heart heavy with loss. As we laid my grandfather to rest, my phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. It was Mr. Carter calling repeatedly. Each ring felt like a reminder of the workplace I was trying to escape, even if just for a moment. Just as I was about to say my final goodbyes, I looked up to see Mr. Carter striding toward us, his face a storm cloud of fury. "Jake, why aren't you at the office? We have deadlines to meet," he barked, his voice slicing through the somber atmosphere like a knife. "Mr. Carter, this is a funeral. My grandfather just passed away," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a mix of anger and disbelief. He scoffed, his lips curling in disdain. "I don't care about your family drama. You need to get back to work. This is unacceptable." The shock on my relatives' faces was palpable, and I could feel the anger rising in the pit of my stomach. As he continued to berate me, cursing everyone around, something snapped within me. "I am not going back to work, especially not now," I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of grief and defiance. In that moment, I saw the fury in Mr. Carter's eyes. His face turned crimson and he began to lash out, knocking over chairs and scattering flowers, creating chaos amidst our mourning. His hands flailed wildly as he shouted obscenities, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. My relatives, fueled by a protective instinct, surged forward. "You can't treat him like this. Get out!" they shouted, their voices rising above Mr. Carter's tirade. It was like a scene from a movie, a whirlwind of emotions, as they confronted him, who was taken aback by their fervor. Before I could fully process what was happening, a few of my cousins grabbed him, wrestling him to the ground. The scene escalated quickly. I could hardly comprehend the chaos unfolding. My heart raced as I watched my family protect me, their faces contorted with anger and determination. As the struggle continued, Mr. Carter swung his arm wildly, trying to free himself. But my cousins were relentless, and in a matter of moments, he lay unconscious, sprawled on the grass. The sight of him, this man who had tormented so many, reduced to a heap of arrogance and rage, felt surreal. Panic set in as I could hardly believe what had just transpired. The police were called, and they arrived promptly, taking Mr. Carter away in handcuffs as he groaned in confusion. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief wash over me. The chaos had subsided, and my family quickly surrounded me, their arms enveloping me in a protective embrace. "Are you okay, Jake?" my cousin Emily asked, her eyes wide with concern. I nodded, though I could hardly speak. The weight of loss and the madness of the moment pressed down on me, but the warmth of my family brought me some comfort. After the funeral, I returned to the office the next week with a heavy heart. I knew HR had to be informed about Mr. Carter's outburst, so I relayed everything to Miss Thompson. She listened intently, her eyes wide with shock as I recounted the events. "We can't let him get away with this," she said firmly. "I'll escalate it to the CEO." Her determination gave me hope, and together we drafted a formal complaint detailing the pattern of abuse and the incident at the funeral. The following days were filled with tension as more employees stepped forward, sharing their own horror stories of Mr. Carter's abuse. It was cathartic, a release of pent-up frustrations that had long been suppressed. I felt a sense of solidarity with my colleagues as we banded together, united by our shared experiences of fear and torment. A week later, we gathered for a meeting with the CEO, Mr. Reynolds. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. We all knew this was a turning point. As we sat in the sleek conference room, employees exchanged nervous glances. The tension was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. The CEO listened attentively as each employee shared their experiences, their voices shaking but resolute. I could see his expression darkening with each new revelation, and I felt empowered by my colleagues' courage. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and recounted the entire ordeal, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. After a thorough investigation, the CEO announced that Mr. Carter had been fired and that an investigation would take place. The news spread like wildfire through the office, and a wave of relief washed over us. Finally, we would have a chance to rebuild. With Mr. Carter gone, the office atmosphere transformed. Our new boss, Miss Lee, was a breath of fresh air, supportive, approachable, and understanding. She encouraged open communication and even implemented a wellness program for employees to share their concerns, fostering a sense of community that had long been absent. As I settled into my new routine, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in months. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer overshadowed my every move. I realized that sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air and let the sun shine in. I often found myself smiling at my coworkers, sharing laughter in the break room, and feeling a camaraderie that had been missing.